Mayor. I sent an email to council members, I believe at the end of last week, regarding a motion I wanted to bring forward that also has to do with an amendment to the council rules. And this has to do with the agreement of conformity and the way in which that's brought forward to council by members of the police force. The intention, or my intention in bringing this forward, is to put into our code exactly how we believe that ought to be handled so that there's no ambiguity. There's been concerns about what is and is not in it, what gets said in council as opposed to what's in it, and so on. And so these numbered items are meant to address that. So I'm just going to briefly walk through them. I hope council members have that in front of them. The first item basically says that what we would like in the agreement of conformity is as much detail as possible about the actual offense. So what is it that the officer who's been charged actually did that resulted in this disciplinary item? So there is, in the agreement of conformity, there's the reference to the specific part of the regulations. That's fine, but what we need to know more is, what does that mean? What actually happened? Secondly, I suggest kind of separating out these agreements into two different categories. The first would be anything that has to do with the normal internal procedures. So to take a random example, an officer who has a cruiser and is not supposed to take it out of county, takes it out of county, and is subject to discipline because of that. And there are many other things that we've seen that have to do with basically administrative details. So my sense about that is that we could have the same procedure we've had before, which is it does not require the chief to be there because it's pretty straightforward. So what we would want in those cases is that what is spoken in council is the same as what is written in the agreement of conformity. So there's no discrepancy there. In addition, if council members have questions about any part of that, they really, they're not appropriate. What we are getting is the information that's written and that's available to the public and that's available to all of us. The second category would be anything that involves interaction with the public, and especially use of force, but there may be other examples. In those cases, I'm asking that we ask the chief to be present and that he answer questions not about the details of what happened. So that's laid out for us, and ought to be no further discussion about that, but that he is available to answer questions that have to do with his rationale in applying a certain level of discipline to this particular offense. Now, the fourth section basically says, I'm just going to read it because I think it's important. Other than procedural issues. So if you have a question about how this is going to be brought to council, or if you have a question for legal, that's okay. But other than procedural issues, council members shall not discuss an agreement of conformity with anyone prior to the agreement being presented to the council. And this mirrors the same understanding that Councilmember Maloney already referred to, that applies to zone changes and applies to the Planning Commission when they're dealing with a zone change. They're not supposed to talk about anything about that until they get into a hearing. I believe the same thing ought to apply to these agreements of conformity. We all ought to have the same information. We all ought not to be talking to anybody prior to those being brought forward. And then finally, I'm still interested in more clarity about what happens if council if council rejects an agreement of conformity. Does it simply go then to a hearing? Does it go back to the chief? Does it go, where does it go and how does it go? But we ought to know that, and we ought to have that, I think, in written form before us. So that's the whole set. Again, the intention is to clarify the procedure, to make sure that we get as much information as possible about the actual offense, and that there be no sidebar conversations about any of the details of what actually happened. And so I am making a motion that this be placed on the docket for the October 22nd council meeting. So move.
Is there a second? Councilmember James Brown seconds. Now, if you want to discuss this, you'll need to raise your real hand since we have folks lined up for council report. Who would like to discuss this? Councilmember Lamb.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Vice Mayor, for bringing this forward. I have one question. I know that because police has been at such the forefront of everything here lately, is there a reason that this wouldn't apply to fire also? Because those are the two areas that we have agreement of conformities with. And I'm just curious your thoughts on this. And I had meant to call you before today, but I don't know where the time goes. So
I would have no objection to Keith has come forward, but anyway, I would have no objection to broadening it. My thinking was that I can't think of an instance where for fire, where it's ever been anything other than their administrative regulations. They don't have the interaction with the public in the same way. Now, I may be wrong about that. And if it's, if there's no objection and people feel it ought to be applied to fire as well, I would entertain an amendment to say police and fire discipline.
I would like to know what Mr. Horn has to say.
I'll just remind you, there's a distinction between the statute that applies to fire and the statute that applies to police. 95-450, which applies to fire, does not have the restriction on public statements that 15-520 does for police. Now, we can craft this to apply to both, but you don't run into the same restrictions with fire that you run into with police. And their procedure in their CBA is different from fire and police, partly because of the differences in the statutes.
Okay, that answers, I appreciate that clarification. Thank you. And so I'll be anxious to see if others have any comments on this before. So thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Swanson, then Councilmember Fred Brown, then Councilmember James Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Vice Mayor. I think this clarifies some things in our process here. I wonder if you can tell me what you found out in your doing research for this. What is actually the purpose of council voting on the discipline? What is our function in taking that vote?
If I can respond to questions, the function is to provide some oversight, to say that the final determination about discipline within the police department rests with the citizens, and we are their elected officials. I think it's as simple as that.
Well, I believe it's in state law, is it not, Keith? That the council is the final arbiter.
It is. There have been, remember, this is a system that grew up in Kentucky and other states that we really had no role in, although all the people are responsible for the way this grew up because our legislators adopted most of the system. Traditionally, there was confusion between 95-450 and 15-520 because 95-450 is written to apply to both police and fire. Eventually, a few years ago, the legislature amended 15-520 to make clear that it is the lead and the primary statute that applies to police. I believe that the system of conformity and approval by council grew out of the confusion between 95-450 and 15-520. 15-520 still makes you the final decision maker where it concerns discipline of police. That's why you ultimately can have a hearing on discipline of police officers and decide not only whether something occurred, but what the appropriate discipline for what occurred would be. And I know that still leaves some confusion because of the limited information you can get under 15520 and still be expected to make a decision on that based on the recommendation of your chief of police.
So that was kind of my understanding, is that we were supposed to be providing some sort of oversight over the police decision. So I've spent some time the last couple of weeks going through the last 10 years of council police discipline decisions. So since 2010, there's been an average of about 10 a year, so it's a little over 100. Every single one that I found passed, all but 3 passed unanimously. So 100% of the discipline decisions were passed by this council. That is not overview. That is not oversight. That is a rubber stamp. Now, we're there because the system was imperfectly created, but unless we're talking about, now I'm not criticizing the police. I think they're doing exactly what the system tells them to do. I'm criticizing council. This is a fundamental flaw in how we are designed to do oversight of police. And, I think Chief Weathers made some really important points about the importance of trusting a police chief. I certainly have no reason not to trust Chief Weathers, but I don't trust every future police chief. We're talking about systems that need to be changed. So I'm going to have to continue to vote against all police discipline cases because we're not given adequate information to decide those cases. I appreciate this clarification. It just clarifies to me more how poorly designed this system is. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I might add, if you would go back 10 more years to about 1999, the council held about 5 hearings, police officer hearings, and we did change the discipline. So you might, if you want to increase your data set, you might go back and look, because councils in the past have made changes to the recommendations, but they've been through the hearing process, which is a little bit different.
I can look at that 20 years ago. I got to admit, 10 years of council minutes was quite a bit.
A lot. Thank you. All right, next is Councilmember Fred Brown to speak to the motion.
Yes, I think, Vice Mayor, you've got some merit in there, but I take a couple of exceptions here. We've got task force that are now in process, and I think some of this might be some ideals that will be coming out of the task force, and we could incorporate that. And I think it's more complex. You're making it a little bit simple as far as your statements, but I think it's more complex. There's history to this, and I would rather see this go to committee of the whole, and us to maybe be able to talk it out a little bit more, and because you've got 4 points there, and I think we're already doing a couple of those. We're supposed to be doing them. In other words, we're supposed to keep our mouth shut about pending cases or things of that nature. So I'd rather put that in the committee of the whole and give us, we might have some other people that might want to get involved right now. And I realize that the buck stops with us, but I think there's a lot of people involved in this. And I know we do have legal, and we do have the unions that are involved in this. And I'm just not comfortable with, just going ahead and voting for something without taking it through a little bit more process. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember James Brown.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Vice Mayor, for bringing this forward. I support moving it forward and not sticking it in committee, because I just think this is an issue that we would all like to weigh in on and be able to talk about. And I have some concerns or some adjustments that I think we might need to discuss. I'm just not going to do that now. And I think when it comes forward, that may be the time. In regards to in regards to Councilmember Lamb's statement, I think to make it, to not single police out and make it something that we look at as well as fire, I think is appropriate. Just look at it public safety wise, even though we may not have the number of cases or the same issues that we do with the police department, but I think that's the best way to proceed. So, and then I'll say this too. When I first came on council and learned of our role as council members when it came in regards to police discipline, I wasn't quite sure about how it all worked and what information was shared and what was appropriate, and actually got a real sharp education about our role in this process and how we need to and how we should move forward in doing it. And I think we made some steps. I think we all know that we are working through some confines that we have by whether state statute, whether by collective bargaining or whatever. And I think, I think we are working to address those issues in the public. And one of the things that we've done is now we got, at least there's public notice of a disciplinary issue on the docket. When I first came on council, unless you were made aware, you didn't know that you might be addressing and voting on a disciplinary issue. So that was one step forward. The other thing was the public statement piece of it. That's a state statute. So we can't speak to or make certain statements in the public about these disciplinary issues. And I'm not saying that it's right, but I think those are the guiding principles that we have to go by now when we address discipline. And council members like myself, and I know there's several others, go back and we work and we try to find out more information which can be shared with us that doesn't compromise the case. So when I vote and when I support whatever the chief's recommendation is, it's based off of the information that I have and have been provided with. And it may not be the same as everybody else, but part of that is knowing how this thing works, how the system works, and getting the information. There are opportunities to improve this system. And I think we all know that and have acknowledged it. And I think we're working through it. But to be, and the public has acknowledged their interest in being involved in this process. And I think that's something that we're trying to work through. But again, and with the constraints of collective bargaining, that's something that we can't just say, but I think all of us or some of us are being diligent about it. So to say that, that we're rubber stamping these disciplines, that's an opinion. And I think, we're doing the best that we can with the constraints that we have on us now to try to address these issues and work within the confines that exist. So, making these decisions and voting on them, when I'm in public, I get asked about them all the time. And I share with them, how it works, how I understand it, and that I feel confident about making some of these decisions. And some of them, you just don't know. But I think one of the most important things that the chief said the other day is he is making discipline recommendations based off of 15 years of research and case study. Even if it came to us as a jury, we don't have that kind of information. And I mean, not saying that our law department couldn't provide it, but I think it's a little deeper, it's broader than that. And I think we got to continue to work to improve the process to make sure that the public is being represented and, what they're asking for is being moved forward. So I'll just say that, but I support this motion to address this, the vice mayor's proposal going forward. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Next, we have Councilmember Maloney and then Councilmember Masadi.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Appreciate you doing this. It's hard to believe we finally am agreeing with you. We needed to clean this up, and you've answered everything what I've been following up. And I think the timing's right because of what's been going on for the last couple of years. We've had people wanting to come see us, and I say I can't see you because it's a police matter. By having this language and educating the public again and putting it, I think it's the right direction we're going. And going back to saying we're rubber stamps, I disagree with that statement because we all get the charges in front of us a couple of days before. If you don't like it, you call the chief up and you ask the chief or the police officer what happened and why. And if you still don't like it, you could still vote against it. Now, when you go out in public, and then somebody asked, why did you vote against it? It said, I saw some things in there that I didn't agree with. Now, if my other colleagues would agree with me, we would have been having a hearing right now, but I cannot, by law, by the state law, I cannot give you my real answer. Now, if we'd have gone to a public hearing, you would understand what my opinion was and why the other council members went that way. So this is a clarification, and I really appreciate it. And just to let everybody know that I think we're on the right track, and I do commend our police department. And I go back to what the mayor said, we changed things back in the 90s because there were some problems. And if you'd have been here in the 70s, you wouldn't want to be dealing with this police matter because there were books written about how the bad things that the police did to this city. We have come a long way cleaning this mess up. In the 80s, we were a lot better. In the 90s, we saw improvement. We're getting improvement. This is an improvement in 2020 to clarify the citizens. We are doing the right thing, what the law says. Now, if you want to change it, go see your senators or your state reps. That's how you get that change. But as of now, we're passing the law, and I commend you, Vice Mayor, for the hard work you did on that one and clearing things up. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Councilmember Masadi.
Thank you, Mayor. Vice Mayor, appreciate you looking into this. I think everyone has a concern about transparency and wants to make sure that there is adequate information provided to all of us to make the right decisions. I did mention last week that I served on the Law Enforcement and Justice Committee, and this topic was brought up a lot. We discussed this at great length about citizen input, the council being the final decision maker on this. And I think, we have to be cautious of that because I think there's going to be some changes made. And we may be a little bit ahead of ourselves going forward with supporting this motion at this time before we get all the input from those committees. And that's why I brought that up last week. Although it has nothing to do with councils, it ultimately may be. Well, there may be other, there may be a civilian review board as a part of this process ultimately. So that's my concern. I'm just a little apprehensive to support this right now until we hear the feedback from those committees. And Mayor, where are we on that? Do you know, as far as timing wise?
It's my understanding the commission can't have their report to me until the 22nd.
Of October?
Yes.
Okay. Vice Mayor, do we need to move on this full steam ahead right away, or can we delay this a bit till we get that report? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I've been interested in moving this forward fairly quickly because I think we need to have it in place for what is coming to us. There may be recommendations coming from the subcommittee of the mayor's task force. I did not watch every single minute, but I watched a fair amount of that. It did not seem to me that any of the recommendations were similar to this. They dealt with different aspects of the review. And so I was interested in having this in place. Will we have another disciplinary situation in the next, couple weeks, months? I don't know. But my guess is no matter what the subcommittee of the task force comes forward with, it'll be months before there's any real action taken. I can't imagine that there'll be anything substantive that would be decided in regard to any recommendation they bring forward before the first of next year. So I'm interested in having this in place. If it turns out that it's duplicative or if it isn't consistent with other recommendations, it can be further amended. But it seems to me that the public would like to see us take some action. This is one of the things that I thought we could do that would help us and would help the public understand kind of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So is it absolutely necessary to move forward like most things? It's not a crisis of that regard, but I think I brought it forward and I wanted to bring it directly onto the docket because I thought that the sooner we do it, the better it'll be.
Well, I don't have any objection to putting it on the docket. I'm just not sure, if I can support it just yet. Once it gets on the docket, I'm just going to have to just consider some of the ramifications that may result as be a result of this. But I appreciate your looking into this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any council member who has not spoken yet who would like to speak? Councilmember Bledsoe.
Thank you, Mayor, for the opportunity, and thank you, Vice Mayor, for putting the resolution and thoughts forward, because I think it helps clarify the issues. When officers are brought forward in disciplinary, they've accepted the wrongdoing. They've acknowledged that there was something that they did, and they've worked with the chief to address it. There's a certain level of humility and responsibility taken when that happens. And so in some respect, I would prefer, just honestly, we either say for both the fire chief and the police chief that when any disciplinary is done, they present it in general. That being said, I understand and appreciate why you've kind of segregated the engagement with the public differently. And I can appreciate that, and I can tentatively support it in that way. And I just want to acknowledge two other things. When there's an officer, I think and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure about 90% of the concerns or disciplinary brought forward in police are internal. They are officers who have saw another officer not behaving wisely. In the day of transparency, in the day of videos and cell phones and everything else, when an officer behaves not to the standard with which we would like them to, they're held account. They're held account by their peers most often, because that reflects poorly on every other officer who is doing above and beyond service well. And so it's in their own best interest to hold themselves accountable and to hold their teammates accountable. And I think the reason that we have not had to have those public hearings is because our command staff does hold their team responsible. And those who have left the department realize that they maybe can't handle that accountability, that transparency, that level of expectation, and on their own leave. So we haven't had to have the formal hearings that they had in the 90s. And I remember hearing about those. Those were not fun experiences. No one wants to go back to where we're having consistent that kind of accountability or need, because I think the command staff in these scenarios has been doing their job and has been holding their team accountable. So I just feel like that needs to be said. I take that vote very seriously. And I think we appreciate and respect our team for doing their job well. So I am willing to support your motion, Vice Mayor Kay, to do this at this time. And I appreciate it. And I appreciate our police department as well. And the responsibility that the chief takes in looking at why he or she is given the disciplinary that they're given. That it is based on precedent. It is based on accountability. And I think that makes me sleep well at night. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken yet to the motion who'd like to? All right, then Councilmember Lamb.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to make one clarification. Councilmember Swanson, I appreciate your work. Trust me, I spent 21 years in that office, so I know that's a lot to go back through. But I also want to make sure that you and the public know that while those 100 or so over the last 10 years are one part of the disciplinary process, there is another part of the record that is the disciplinary hearing process, which is a much more formal process and is in a totally separate record because of the way that it's managed. And it is a quasi-judicial process, and I have sat through since 92. I couldn't tell you how many, but every single one of them I've sat in on since 92. So I just don't want you or the public to think that, well, we're rubber stamping something, which I don't think that we're rubber stamping, especially now that we have the ability to go and look at this and ask questions, but that there is another section of another part of the record that deals with the police disciplinary hearings, which actually take those that are that are held in a different accountability. So I just wanted to make that clarification. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. All right. Does anyone else want to speak to the motion? Vice Mayor Kay. Let's hear from Councilmember Ellinger, or Vice Mayor Kay, you haven't spoken, although it is your motion. Councilmember Ellinger will be next then.
I was going to summarize, so
Okay,
I'd be interested in having Councilmember Ellinger.
Councilmember Ellinger.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Vice Mayor, for bringing this forward. And I can agree with a lot of what you're doing. I guess my concern is just some of the wordsmithing on it. Like number one, it says as much detail as possible. I'm not sure what that means. And I think that could be probably from a legal standpoint, maybe be more clarified. There's just, when I was just reading through it, it wasn't as succinct or as much as I'd like it to be. And I guess that when Councilmember Brown had talked about putting a committee, that would be what I'd like to just have some time just to go through and make some wordsmithing changes on it, just to be a little more succinct, like I said, because I just don't know what as much detail as possible means. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Kay.
Thank you. I'll pick up Councilman Ellinger's comment first. Mr. Horn may want to come forward. I think that the intention there was to basically reflect the fact that there are legal limits as to what can and cannot be placed in that, and that short of violating those legal limits, that's the detail we would like. So, Mr. Horn?
I think that that's a fair summary of it. It's difficult to know because every disciplinary action, as you can imagine, is different. The intent is, and the police have been working on and will continue to work on, how much detail to put in the agreement of conformity so that once you, the council, if you accept them, they're available to the public and they can see the details of what was involved in the disciplinary action. But it's a difficult line to walk without knowing the specifics of the situation. So it's a difficult, I agree with Councilmember Ellinger, it's a difficult language to craft because it's hard to say how much detail will be in there or explain what that would be.
Thank you. So I think the judgment about whether it's complete enough is one we have to make when we get the agreement of conformity put before us. Do we think we have enough information or not? And then really just 2 points. I want also to address the question of whether we're just functioning as a rubber stamp. My sense is that we have had confidence in the process that's in place in recent years. We've had confidence in the body of the police force, in the command staff, and in the chief. Now that could change, and we might end up questioning a lot of these, and we might not end up voting in favor of many of them if we thought we weren't getting the information we wanted, and if we weren't aware of the way in which overall police morale is affected by these issues. So I respect Councilmember Swanson's opinion. I understand where he's coming from. I respectfully disagree with the conclusion he's reached about why the council has, for the most part, seen fit to simply agree with what's brought forward. And then one very specific point I want to make, I want to be clear about this. My understanding of the language that I'm proposing is that it would be inappropriate to ask anybody on the police force, including the chief, anything about the agreement. That what we get is what we get. What we get is in writing, it's brought forward to us, and that's what we get verbally, with the exception that the chief can talk about his rationale. But what I'm hoping is we avoid the perception that some council members who may be more comfortable talking to the chief or other people, have more information, and that's what they're using to base their judgment on. Now, I've lived in this community for a long time. There were police chiefs that I didn't know very well, I was not comfortable with. The longer I've been on the council, the more I've known about the people who lead our force. I feel perfectly comfortable calling Chief Weathers about many things. But I'm sure there are people on council who don't feel as comfortable. And that should not privilege me in terms of my thinking about a conformity of agreement. So I think it's inappropriate, and that's what the language reflects. It's not a matter of talking to anybody about these details until they come before us. So I hope people understand that, and I hope you can support that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. All right, I think I have caught everybody who wanted to speak. And so if you are supportive of the motion to move this to the docket, please raise your hand. And we'll need to hold them up as we may have some of each. All right. Okay, I see 7 yeses. All those opposed, please raise your hand. I see 4. Who are we missing? Oh, Councilmember Bledsoe, are you a yes or a no?
How about I be half?
Let's do the vote again, because I thought we had, let's see how many we have here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13. And I did not get 13 votes. So let's vote again. All those in favor, please raise your hand where I can see it. 9. Okie dokie. All those opposed, raise your hand. All right, that time we got the votes, and it passed 9-4. Hillary, were you able to see the 4 no votes?
Yes, I was. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor Kay?
If I may,
Yes.
I would hope that between now and the time that this goes on the docket, that people will take the opportunity to talk to Chief, anybody else on the force, Lieutenant Bastian, anybody else who's active in the FOP, and anybody else you want to talk to get a sense of how they feel about this. I've had some informal conversations